All right, everyone. So this is really one of the most important lectures that I'm going to give you here, and this is basically what's going to lead you to your first essay. So writing arguments is a very tricky thing because writing arguments can be full of holes that you can fall into if you're not careful. But if well done, a solid argument is something that is going to not only convince your audience, but really provide sort of a sound logical base for moving forward from an opinion into something that's fully fleshed out as into an argument. So, just a quick reminder: an argument is a lot of things. It's something that's convincing. It's something that offers an idea, a claim. It has lots of good reasons and evidence that are based on logic. And then it can take into account opposing viewpoints as well. So the important thing is when you're in an argument, it's not about who yells loudest. It's not about, who makes the most points. It's not about any of these things. What it's about is making a clear, concise statement that is backed up by evidence with good logical flow and that takes into account that perhaps other ideas exist as well. So an argument does a lot of things. A really good argument is something that is going to be narrow and focused. So for your first essay, you're going to have a very broad option of what you want to write about. I want you to choose something that is clear and focused and narrow. So if you want to write about wartime politics, that's fine, but it's going to be a very broad topic. I'm going to ask you to narrow it down to something very, very specific. So I give you an example here. You don't want to just say education is important for jobs. Everybody knows that. Everybody agrees with that. If you say funding for public education is very important and it is an issue that is we are underfunded right now, that is definitely an arguable stance. That's something that you can prove. It's something you can argue. It's something you can focus on with evidence and reasoning. So you have to start, most importantly, with a claim. So a claim in an argument is your thesis statement. And what it says is that X needs to happen because of X, Y, and Z. So the example here of we need more money for school. Yes, we do. But that's far, far too general of a claim. I can poke a lot of different holes in that by saying, yes, but we don't have the money, or yes, but the money goes to free lunch programs, or yes, but we need money for our athletics department, all these different things. A much better, clearer claim, is something like this. It says public universities should allocate X amount of dollars per year to fund freshman scholarships for academic achievement. Notice that in this claim, we have a lot of specificity of what we're talking about. We're talking about public universities in particular. So we have a particular audience we're speaking to here. We're giving the exact amount of dollars, so we're not saying they should just give us money. That's too broad as well. We're saying it should go to freshmen, specifically, freshman scholarships, and even more specifically, freshman scholarships for academic achievement. So this is an arguable claim. It's something that I could do a lot of research on. It's something I can back up with a lot of facts and opinions, and it's something that I can really incorporate a lot of good evidence into. So that is how you create a solid arguable thesis. So a characteristic of an argument. You are going to have an audience that varies based on what your argument is. And your audience really can be any one of these areas. And this is, I've only noted sort of 3 areas that an audience can be on an argument, but there's a lot of in-between areas as well. So the most common one is that you will have an audience that is neutral, which means they may not care about your issue that much, but they don't not care about it. So something like education, a lot of people, yes, are in education, and yes, it's important because they have kids in it or they were in the education system, but they're not the people who are making the policies. They're not the people who are running the school, so they don't have this passionate need. So they're really just kind of neutral about it. You also can have an audience who is negative or anti-stance. So say you have an argument for climate change, which by now, most people agree is fairly obvious. But rewind about 10 years ago, there was a huge debate over climate change. And there was a lot of people who were very anti-climate change, and they were very resistant to any argument that tried to prove that climate change existed. So that is sort of a negative audience. And on the other side, you have an audience that is a pro audience. So this is a much easier audience to convince. If you have an argument that the Cowboys are going to the Super Bowl this year, then you're going to have a lot of people in Dallas who agree with you. You're going to have a lot of people in other states who may not agree with you, but it's very easy to convince an audience that is pro. So you really need to gauge where your audience is on your issue before you start writing, and that will change how you write your argument. For example, over here on a negative argument audience, if you have a negative audience, one thing that really can help is to try and establish some common ground between you and your audience as a way to get them to even listen to your argument. You see this in politics all the time. For example, in one of the debates, Clinton specifically mentioned her father being sort of an everyday, workaday kind of guy. He did something with drapery, made drapes or sold drapes, something like that. And the whole point of that story was to show that she, even though she had millions of dollars, that she was, a common everyday person, came from common roots just like everybody else. And she was trying to establish a kind of common ground with people who may not believe that she understands what it's like to be a normal everyday person. So that's just an example for you. So an argument has reasons with lots of good evidence. This is key. If you can logically prove your argument, then you will have no problem convincing your audience. If you can't, if they can poke little holes into your logical reasoning, then you're going to have a problem convincing them. And that's going to be my job grading your papers, is to look for what areas I can poke those holes into and how well do you defend these ideas. So logical reasoning is really important in arguments. There are emotional aspects to arguments which you are absolutely going to use, but the logical reasoning needs to always be there. So inductive reasoning basically starts with this specific piece of evidence and moves to a larger idea or conclusion from that. So the example here is that Law and Order, for example, is inductive reasoning, or all these different crime shows, where you have all these little clues and they lead to a large conclusion that tells us the answer. Deductive reasoning starts with a premise, so it starts with a generally accepted idea, and then says, well, if this is true, then this must be true. So just an example here is, it says dairy products make you sick, frozen yogurt contains dairy, ergo frozen yogurt will make me sick. So you can see how A equals B, B equals C, A equals C in this type of deductive reasoning. So an argument really should, as I said, focus on your audience. So you need to focus on your reader, their needs, their values, their concerns. This doesn't mean that you're just talking to their emotional appeals, but it does mean that you really take into account how to situate your argument to what your audience wants and needs. So the values or principles that they consider important can be one of the things you talk about. It can be a physical need. It can be an emotional need. And an argument recognizes opposing views. So arguments don't just say, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right. What they do is they say, I'm right because of X. Now, I understand that you may think that Y is right, and I'm going to show you why it's not actually correct. So I'll give you an example here. For example, if you have someone who says that gingerbread cookies are the best Christmas cookies, and then you have another person who says that chocolate chip cookies are the best cookies, the gingerbread person could say, yes, chocolate chip has good flavor, however, it's not Christmassy. So what they're doing is taking it into account, the other person's view, and then they're refuting it. And that's a silly example, but it gives you an idea of what I'm trying to get at. So a good argument really starts with the same ideas as making a solid essay paper. So you start with the pre-write, and you write your thesis statement. Now, your thesis doesn't have to be concrete at this point. You should go back and edit it and revise it after this, but get an idea down of what is it that I'm trying to argue. So brainstorm and start making a list of reasons that support your ideas. And then just for a minute, switch sides and think, okay, if I was on the opposite side, what would I be saying? And that will give you your opposing points of views that you can then refute. So there's a lot of different ways you can do this, but really starting with a pre-write and a brainstorm is a great idea. And remember your audience. If you can identify who your audience is, who are you writing for? And for me, it's not going to be you're writing to your professor. It should be, what type of people am I writing to? Am I writing to people who are pro-government, who are anti-animal cruelty, who are young, old, female, male? It doesn't matter. You need to identify who that audience might be. And then what do they know about the issue? What do they need to know? Do they care about it? How do you make them care about it if they don't? And then what kind of audience do you have? How can you create this connection with your audience? And then, of course, you also have to do some research for your issue. Lots of different sources to use for that. Next, you really need to get your idea in order. So you start drafting. So organize and draft. So start with, there's a lot of different methods you can use in a good argument. You can start with the claim, then add your reasons, and then do your opposing view. This is really the most common way to do this. Other people start with the claim and then go to the opposite side first, show why it isn't true, and then come back around and show all of their reasons about why their side is right. You can also start with all of the reasons, show the opposing view and why it's wrong, and then end with the claim. This is really far less common because usually the thesis statement is going to go at the beginning of your argument. And then, of course, last what you could do is the opposing view, then the reasons, then the claim. This is done quite often in something like advertising, where they show you the sort of opposite product or why the competition's product doesn't work. And then they'll show you why theirs works, and then they'll end with sort of a tagline of why you should buy their product. But note that there's really 3 things you have to have in all of these situations. So you'll start with an intro. You open with some type of hook. Okay, so it could be an attention grabber, a story, a counter argument, a situation, something to make your reader sit up and listen and say, hey, that applies to me. And then you really need to work on your tone. So make sure that your tone is reaching your audience in the right way. So if you have a strong argument about something very divisive, say abortion or, I don't know, politics, you're going to want to adopt a very careful, conciliatory tone that doesn't offend an audience, because you don't know where your audience is on that issue. At the same time, if you have something that is very common and something that is widely accepted, you're going to want to formalize your tone so that it feels more academic and scholarly. Make sure you have lots of good reasons and evidence. Use good transitions. Write a strong conclusion at the end. The conclusion should basically wrap up your argument and restate your claim and restate your main ideas, the reasons, the evidence that you gave. Think about for a presidential debate, once again, at the end of the debate, you don't have the candidate who just says, okay, that's it, bye, and then walks off the stage. They always wrap up by giving their final statement, and that's exactly what you're doing in your conclusion. And then don't forget, this is super important, cite your sources. Cite them in text, cite them on the bibliography. This means whether it's an idea, a phrase, a sentence, it doesn't matter. Cite it anyways. Okay. Lastly, revisions and editing. It's a good idea not to try and just go through and edit once and be done. I personally do this. I do several rounds of edits on any papers that I do. Take a break, walk away for 10 minutes, go watch TV, come back, or go for a walk or jog or something. Come back, look at it with fresh eyes, and then do your final revision or your final editing. And then make sure, of course, you edit and proofread carefully. So that's it. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, best of luck.